Okay, here we are in the second half of the week 7 video about the introduction to the transformation octave. We're going to have a conversation this evening that includes you talking about your own experience of transformation, but let's lean into this a little bit here. So just to review, we want to have the best possible cognitive maps so that we know as clearly and fully as we can what's actually happening, so we can be making the best possible decisions. And a part of what that means is that our maps have to be comprehensive and complex, but also simple. And that's the trick, is how do we have maps that are big enough, complex enough, and simple enough that we can actually use them. And as we are trying to use a cognitive map, part of what we're using is our intelligence, which is our sort of innate, or becomes our innate ability. Our intelligence grows through the earlier parts of our life, but once we get to be grown, once we get certainly into our late teens, early 20s, our intelligence is pretty much fixed. Knowledge we can always add. We can always add more data, but the problem is this the right data? Is it the factual data? Is it actually accurate? But we can expand pretty much infinitely our knowledge. But what we really need is to be able to make sense of the data using our intelligence in such a way that we see as much of what is really going on as possible, that we are functioning with wisdom. Right? So change is something that happens at various different levels, and we want to understand change as replacement. When I change my socks, Yeah, it changes of size. I move the thermostat up or down. The Fed is about to change the interest rate, so we move things up and down. But we also shift within a hierarchy. We move to greater and greater complexity as we move up the hierarchy, or we move up to greater authority, or in some sense, there is a change in a linear way through the hierarchy. So growth makes the system bigger, but transformation is moving up the hierarchy. And transformation is what we're really looking for here. All right, so transformation is the movement from one stage to a more structurally complex and effective stage of development. And so for our purposes, we have this transformation octave. We're looking at moving from do, where things are stable for us, to re, where, something's not working here. There's some irritation within the system. So I've got to, figure out what it is that it means. Now, if my meaning making is, I know what this is, I know how to solve it. This is not a conflict. This is simply a problem that I know how to solve. But if I'm making meaning at this point and I can't figure it out, I need to go up to fa so that I can then have other perspectives. I'm looking at different sources of information so as to be able to create a more complex map. A map that takes into account more of what it is that's going on, so I can make sense of the world and make good decisions. And having constructed this map, then I have to kind of step back and listen to the map so that I understand what it is that's going on. I understand what it has to teach me. Even though I created the map takes on a life of its own, and it becomes something that is actually going to be a source of information for me when I come to figuring out a different way of being, a new way of showing up, hopefully one that will durably move me to do. So I'm back up at do, an octave apart. All right, so this is our basic format for transformation. Now, I pointed out to you before, there's more of this on this website, so you can go check that out there. But for right now, I want to look instead at the fact that transformation is something that is happening all the time. We're always moving through transformation. It's a part of it's a natural aspect of our being. It's the movement of evolution. Evolution has both direction and purpose. It's moving towards greater complexity, and it's for the purposes of having the system function better, that is, to work together with itself. So for us to get with the program, to be a part of the evolutionary process, we have to be open to and engaged with and creating opportunities for our own transformation. Now, sometimes transformation happens, most of the time, transformation happens slowly. We don't really see it happening. Occasionally, it happens so quickly or so dramatically that we actually can see it. So, for our conversation this evening, I want you to share with us some experience when you've experienced some kind of transformation. Now, you may have to think about this a bit. I've been thinking about it for many years, so I've got a lot of stories that I can tell you. But just as a way of example, I want to tell you a story about a weekend, a Thanksgiving weekend when I was a senior in high school, that was a transformative experience for me. Now, in order to understand the transformation, you have to have the before and the after. So the before is, I grew up as the middle child in a family in sort of like what was for me absolutely average middle class life. I grew up in a neighborhood that was a post-World War II housing development in Prairie Village, Kansas, suburban Kansas City. And as a matter of fact, the 1956 Yearbook Encyclopedia, if you look under the heading for suburb, you will see a picture of the street just south of where I grew up. So I grew up in the quintessential suburb, at least according to the World Book Encyclopedia. When I was in 5th grade, we moved south out of Prairie Village to unincorporated area, which shortly after we moved there, Prairie Village annexed that part of it. So Prairie Village followed me south into a bigger house that my father had designed. He had interests in being an architect, but he was an industrial engineer. And he did well enough that we lived on his salary. My mom was a homemaker. She had a degree in home ec. So both of my parents had college degrees. At the time, I didn't see that as being at all unusual. And I lived at that point in what was a fairly diverse community, because we not only had Protestants, we had Catholics and Jews living together in this neighborhood. Now, there weren't any folks of color. The only time I saw black folks was when somebody came into the community to deliver something or to clean somebody's house. There were no people of color in my high school. The most diversity we got was from the foreign exchange students who would come and stay with somebody for a while. And so they would bring some diversity in. But I didn't really have peers who were of different origins than I. So at some point in my junior year, I made a comment about a buddy of mine about him being cheap, and he had a German surname, and my dad was like, you got to be careful about saying things like that, because the notion that somebody's cheap is it can be taken as being anti-Semitic. And I said, what's that? Well, that's believing that Jews are unworthy, they're of less value. This was a conversation with my dad. I said, why would anybody think that? Well, because of the Holocaust during World War II. The Holocaust? I had no idea what that meant. I was a junior in high school at a really good school, really well resourced, great teachers. And as a junior in high school, I had never heard of the persecution of Jews or anything about the Holocaust in World War II. So that'll give you an idea of the innocence, or the lack of information or education that I'm bringing to this experience. I was very much involved in my local church. I was a leader in the youth group there. I was a leader in the youth planning for my association within the church, my conference. And that got me to an event where I got voted in to be the part of the planning committee for a youth forum that was going to be held in the summer of 1967. In 1966, as you may recall, there were riots in Los Angeles and Watts neighborhood and in other places, including Huff Avenue in Cleveland. And so planning for this youth event of which I was a member of the planning team, on Thanksgiving, we had Thanksgiving dinner together my senior year in high school. And it was either that evening or the next morning, my folks took me to the airport. I got on a plane. I flew to Cleveland, got picked up in a Plymouth station wagon, threw my stuff in the back. We drove to Huff Avenue. And I had no idea about the history of this at this point. And there was this big 3-story house there that was going to be where we were living together, half a dozen of us on this planning team over the weekend. As it happened, one of the members of that planning team was a kid my age, similar kinds of academic and class background, except he was black. He was from Shaker Heights. So he was just like literally a stone's throw, not literally a stone's throw, but just outside of Cleveland. And so this was my first opportunity to have any kind of overextended conversation with somebody who was African American, who was black. And I looked forward to getting to know him over the course of this weekend. So during this weekend, we were planning for an event that was going to happen in the next summer about the effects of poverty and racism on people within the United States. And so as preparation for that, we were getting to know the folks who lived in the neighborhood. And there were some kids our own age who lived in the neighborhood. And so we had conversations with them. And we had conversations with people who were poor, living on welfare. And one of the conversations that really stood out for me was that with a woman she had 3 kids. She had no partner. She lived on welfare. Her dream, her hope, was that her children would not be on welfare. She had no sense that she would ever be able to get off welfare. But she knew the system, and she knew how she had to relate to the system in order to be able to provide for her kids. So she knew where to find food, and she knew where to find cheap clothes. She knew where to find a pair of used sneakers for her kids that would cost 25 cents. So she was savvy. She had really good information about how to make this work. So one of the other things that happened that weekend was that the person who cooked for us was a person by the name of Jean. And Jean was the first person that I'd ever met of indeterminate sex. I couldn't tell whether it was Jean with a J or a G. I couldn't tell whether this was a man or a woman. There was nothing about Jean's body or voice or anything the thing I really knew for sure about Jean was that Jean really liked pepper. Everything that Jean cooked for us was really peppery. And it was very cordial, so our meals, were provided there at this big house out of this kitchen. So all of these things happening within the Friday, Saturday, Sunday of a weekend. And so Sunday night, I go to bed in the bedroom on the 3rd floor of this house on Huff Avenue. And Monday morning, I get up and I throw my stuff in my bag and go downstairs, and Jean has fixed breakfast, and here are these very peppery scrambled eggs, and it's time to get to the airport. So I throw my bag into the back of this Plymouth station wagon, and they drive into the airport. I get on the plane. I fly back to Kansas City. My mom picks me up at the airport, drops me off at my high school. Same high school that I left Wednesday afternoon before. I'm late. It's probably 2nd, 3rd period now. So I go into the high school and I go into the office, and I've got my note from my mom, and here's what's going on. And I'm just getting to school. And so I'm kind of checking in, and I see a girl from my class, somebody I'm not very close, particularly close to, but I was close enough that I remembered a conversation about prom the previous spring and what she had paid for her prom dress. And the prom dress, the money that she had spent, a prom dress is not something you expect. Maybe you get a chance to wear it again someday, but mostly it's this just for this event. This is clothing you're going to wear once. And she had spent more on her prom dress than this woman on Huff Avenue in Cleveland had to spend for herself and her 3 kids for a year. And I'm standing there in the office and I'm looking around, and nothing has changed. It's exactly as it was last Wednesday. And everything has changed. I'm seeing it through an entirely new lens. And a part of that experience for me was that I had absolutely no hope that I could talk to anybody there about what my experience was and have them understand it. It was like so much had been revealed to me. And I knew you don't have to go to Huff Avenue in Cleveland to find it. You know, a mile and a half away in downtown Kansas City, you're going to find people living the same way. This is not a distance in terms of geography. This is distance in terms of class and wealth and race. And the kid that I got to meet, the kid from Shaker Heights, who was the black, by the end of that weekend, he didn't look black to me. He looked like me. Because we had so much more in common than the kids who lived there. And there was this one kid who, when I first met him, he was from Huff Avenue there. And when I first met him, I was scared of him. This was a street kid. He was tough. And he was tough enough to live in a dangerous neighborhood. And I said to him at one point, I said, you know, I've gotten so much from this. I really want to be able to have you see what it's like to live in my neighborhood. I want to share this experience. I want you to come and stay with me for a weekend. He said, oh, no, I can't do that. I said, what do you mean? Why not? He said, it wouldn't be safe. Wouldn't be safe. I live in a very safe neighborhood. What are you talking about? Wouldn't be safe. He said, it's safe for you. Wouldn't be safe for me. And I knew what he was saying was true, but I didn't yet understand why it was true. So I look back on those 3 days as a time of tremendous transformation for me. I never could have anticipated what it was that was going to do for me. But today, you know, now 50 years later, I'm still resonating from that. So I want you to talk about your transformational experiences. What has happened for you that you have been transformed by? And as you're looking for those and figuring out what you want to talk about this evening, one of the things we want to acknowledge is that transformation is not something that we choose in terms of what we're actually what we're looking to change. It's a kind of vulnerability. It's becoming available for a kind of an accident that happens, which is our own transformation. There's a story, apparently it's a true story, I can't remember who it's about, but it was a story about a baseball player who was really, you know, he was a big hitter, big fielder, he was really a big star, and a Cub reporter got a chance to interview him. And the Cub reporter, he'd already figured out what the story was before he interviewed the guy. It was like, this guy works really hard, he's always out there for batting practice, he hustles all the time. And so he asked him this kind of softball question about how it is that you, what do you attribute your success as a ball player? And the player says, I'm just really lucky. The reporter said, lucky? What are you talking about? You're always at batting practice. You work really hard. You hustle all the time. And the star said, well, yeah, I do. I find that really improves my luck. Hitting a fastball's luck, but you can do things that will increase your luck. And so if what we want is transformation, there are certain things that we can do which will improve the likelihood that we're going to experience some transformation. So I'm going to pull back up the slides here and talk about some things that will increase the likelihood of our being transformed. That when we experience transformation, it's in the context of a situation in which we feel like we matter. I have value. The situation I am in values me. And what it is that I do matters. The choices that I make will make a difference. So I want to be careful about what my choices are because I have agency, right? And in the midst of this, the more I can experience different perspectives, the more I can see the world from a different point of view, the more I'm going to expose myself to opportunities for transformation. So conversely, trauma is when we are told that we don't matter. that there is nothing that we can do, and we really shouldn't have hope that things are going to be different. So if what we want to do is to create a world in which we become wise, we grow up into the capacity to use more and more complex maps, if we want to experience transformation, we need to be able to know that we can all make it up to eighth order there. That for us to be able to do that, we need to create a world in which everyone knows that they matter, that they have value, that they are respected, that they have dignity. We need a world in which everyone knows that their choices matter, that what they do will create the world in which we all live. And so we should be very mindful, accountable, responsible for the choices that we make. And that our capacity to make the best choices will be increased the more we experience the vast diversity of the world in which we live. All right. So tonight, I want to hear your stories about your own experience of transformation. And we're going to go back and we're going to look at this transformation octave and see, how does this fit? How does this anticipate or predict, or perhaps even tell us how we can go deeper into our own transformation? All right.